Hello, and happy marvelous Monday, everybody. I hope that you are well. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to have this session today, which is something that I try to do once a month. I am Karissa Spann, the landlord and tenant coach, and today's session is all about Q&A, questions and answers. So, this live today, I'm live on Facebook, I'm live on YouTube, as well as LinkedIn. This session today is for landlords as well as tenants. And so, if you have any questions pertaining to landlord and tenant matters, that's what we are discussing today. Over the past few weeks, I've spent a considerable amount of time sharing different topics, answering questions based off of fair housing laws, the application process, how to handle landlord and tenant disputes, and so much more. And so today, because I recognize that sometimes I am not able to answer all the questions, I wanted to just do a session where it's just Q&A. So if you have questions, if you have comments, remarks, or observations today, please drop it in the comment box. If this is your first time tuning in, let me say thank you and welcome to the Landlord and Tenant Talk Show with me. I'm your host, Karissa Spann. I am excited to share information each and every week right here on this platform, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I share information because I want to help as many landlords and tenants as possible. I believe that an educated rental community is a better working community. So whether you are a landlord, whether you are a tenant, I promise to always share information that is helpful and applicable to you as well as for you. Is that all right? Would you do me a favor in the chat box in the comment section? If this is your first time, let me know where you are tuned in from. I love to know where my viewers are watching from because occasionally I give information and it may be for a specific area. So, for instance, if you're watching from North Carolina or New York, I have people who are tuned in. I have a young lady who she tunes in from the Philippines. Okay. So I try to share information that is applicable for the jurisdiction that your rental property is in, or if you're a tenant for the jurisdiction that you live in. All right, so I'm excited to welcome my students who are also tuned in today. I am a property management professional as well as an educator. I'm all things property management, housing inspector. And so the list goes on and on and on. So today, I wanted to do well, a recap really quickly from the previous week because I did have someone to inbox me. They had a question on some information that I shared last week, and so I'm going to get into that today. But again, today is just more about answering questions that you may have, and then also if you have a topic or subject that you would like for me to cover in the upcoming weeks, please let me know so that I could share that information with others. I have a large population of viewers who are tenants. And I get a lot of questions in my inbox from tenants who are maybe having a dispute or some concern with their current landlord. And so, if you are a tenant and you're not comfortable placing your comment in the box publicly, please inbox me. You can also email me. I will give you my email address. I'll put that up on the screen in a little while. And so today, I just wanted to, again, just do a quick recap of last week and then to answer questions that any of you have today pertaining to landlord and tenant issues. All right, so just a quick recap from last week. I shared information both for landlords as well as tenants. And I do that because I don't want the conversation to always be in favor of the landlord, and I don't always want my conversation to be in favor of tenants. We recognize that From one side of the aisle to the next, it is sometimes a challenge when you enter into, for instance, a lease agreement with someone that you don't know, not really understanding expectations of the other. Sometimes things happen, things are said, sometimes the lease is breached. And when that happens, I challenge people to take a look at their role and their responsibility, because both landlords and tenants have a responsibility when it comes to that lease. And what is a lease? A lease is a legally binding document. It holds each party accountable to the terms that they both sign, saying they are agreeing with or agreeing to. All right. So when it comes to the lease, I always tell my clients and landlords, look over the lease, make sure that the terms are clear, make sure that the term of the lease is clear. So whether it's a short-term lease or a long-term lease, know and understand that when you put all of your expectations in writing and you make it clear and you can understand as well as explain the terms of that rental lease agreement, that makes you a better housing provider or landlord, because sometimes tenants may not always understand some of the strong language that's used in a rental lease agreement. And so sometimes tenants say, will sign a lease, not really understanding all of the terms and the conditions in that rental lease agreement. And so in the upcoming weeks, I'm going to get into some of the paragraph and the language that I use in my lease document. And I know that some people find it hard to believe, but it is true that my lease package is at least 61 pages long. And I know some people say, well, Karissa, isn't that an overkill? Is that too much? Well, it all depends on how you view your business. And I live by the philosophy that if you treat it like a business, it will pay you like a business. And so, certainly, when it comes to rental property, it is an asset, and you always want to cover your asset. Okay. And so, how do you cover it? You put everything in writing. You think about, worst case scenario, whether it's maintenance or pest control, the lease up process, responsibility of the tenant as well as you, who's going to maintain the utilities, what about housekeeping, what about parking? And there are so many other things that go into creating a strong rental lease agreement. Here's what I do know. Having been in the industry for almost 3 decades, I recognize that it's not what we know, it's what we can prove. And so I put everything in writing. I make it clear. I don't like to make it complicated. And I do that because I want my tenants and renters to understand what they can expect out of me, and then also what I expect out of them. And it's ultimately up for landlords as well as tenants to determine and decide in advance whether or not it is a good fit. And so I want people to understand that it is important to ask questions before signing a rental lease agreement. Tenants can ask questions. Landlords should always be asking questions, but I believe in asking the right questions. All right. And so I shared some of that information last week. Hello, Dee. Thank you so much for tuning in, beautiful. And so I shared a bit of that last week. All right. And so I just wanted to do a quick recap of that. Hello, Queen Lisa. You said it seems like I am for landlords. Well, I am a landlord and tenant coach. And so I share information for landlords, but I also share information for tenants. And so that's why I wanted to do this Q&A today, because I want to know what information is helpful for tenants and renters. So if you have a question, Lisa, I'm not sure if you are a tenant or landlord, but for tenants who have questions, this is what I am here for. Okay, to answer questions that you have, whether it's pertaining to your current landlord or maybe you're looking to move, and knowing what to expect, knowing what questions to ask your prospective new landlord. So, Queen Lisa, I'm not sure if you were able to join my session last week or the week prior, but one of the things that I typically like to do is I'll give tips for landlords, but I also give tips for tenants. And so if if some of the information that I'm sharing, if it seems like it's more for the landlords, and sometimes it may be, because I want landlords to understand that in many cases there's a better way, a more effective way to do business. And so if I can help a landlord to understand that tenants do have rights, right? That's my job. That's what I'm here for. All right. Hello, Pearline. Thank you so much for tuning in. Atlanta is in the building. Love you. Bless you. Bless you. Bless you. Okay. So, Queen Lisa, you said, what is the best way to sue your landlord? Great question. I had a conversation with a tenant just a little earlier today. It depends on what type of suit you're trying to bring. What are you suing your landlord for? Is it for damage? Let's say, for instance, there was a flood or roof leak and your property was damaged, your personal property, maybe your clothing, pocketbooks, shoes, things of that nature. Um, that would be a civil lawsuit. If you are trying to sue your landlord for, let's say, a landlord and tenant issue pertaining to repairs not being completed, there's a different court for that, and then it also depends on what jurisdiction you are in. So if you're in the DC area, then obviously there's a landlord and tenant court. So I see your comment here: breach of contract. So I would suggest, if it's in DC, Queen Lisa, reach out to DC Landlord and Tenant Court. And this is what I share all the time: tenants can always sue landlords. Now, if you are in the DC area or in any area that is pro tenant, you can, just depending on your income, you may likely qualify for an attorney who will represent you, and you don't have to pay. All right. So, Queen Lisa, I don't want to get into the specifics, or the details of your situation. Please inbox me or please email me. I want to get you some information and get you on the right track. See, that's what this is for. I share information to whoever needs the information. And so if you have questions, go ahead and drop it in the comments section. I may not have all of the answers. I don't proclaim to know it all, but what I don't know, I will find out. I will do some research for you and follow up, or guide you in the right path of where you can get the information. And so thank you so much for your questions. All right, Queen Lisa, you said you know about that. It's a civil action. Okay, absolutely. And so in many jurisdictions, landlord and tenant laws are in place to make sure that housing providers and property owners or managers are providing housing that is decent, safe, and sanitary. And there are things that are happening that are not in accordance to the lease. I'm sorry, to the law, and I get that. But I want tenants to understand that if you, just do a little research, you can get an attorney that will represent you, that will take your landlord to court for things such as a breach of contract. It is very possible. It is not hard to do. I don't want tenants to feel like, and I've had some people to inbox me who were tenants, and they felt like they were being bullied by their landlord, they were being harassed by their landlord, or that their landlord was taking advantage of them. Laws are in place. They're not always in favor of the landlord, right? And so, again, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And so, if you are in a situation, Queen Lisa or anybody, and the landlord has breached a contract, please reach out to a landlord and tenant attorney, a tenant advocate office. Yes, it does cost thousands of dollars. You're right. It costs thousands, whether it's for a tenant lawsuit being filed against the landlord, and it also costs thousands of dollars for landlords to file suits against tenants. And so that's why I say, maybe let's do some research to find out if you could, as a tenant, find an attorney that will represent you pro bono, meaning they will not charge you. In the DC area, there's an office of the tenant advocate. You can always contact them and they will guide you, they will direct you. So I don't know the jurisdiction that you are in. So if that's what I said, Queen Lisa, please email me or inbox me offline so I can get more information to give you what you need pertaining to your situation. So I had another tenant. As a matter of fact, two tenants reached out to me today, and I thought it was just so ironic because I'm having this Q&A today. But I had a young lady who she had a roof leak. She's renting a house. She had a roof leak. The owner allegedly knew that the roof was leaking at least 4 or 5 years ago and never made the repair. So, obviously, when there is a roof leak or any type of damage or problem, usually the problem will not correct itself. And so, over a period of time, the roof leaked, and this tenant's property was damaged. It was destroyed by not just water, but also mold. And so, this tenant, obviously, she was concerned. She complained that she lost a lot of things. She did, fortunately for her, she did have a renter's insurance policy, which covered some of the damage, but it did not cover all. And so she wanted to know um, if she could sue her landlord. And so I gave her information and I did guide her because she seemed to have thought that she didn't have any options. I had another young lady who reached out to me today, and her landlord was, in fact, bullying her. So this tenant sent me emails um, that her landlord sent her, and so I guided her on the best path in that situation. One of the things that I always like to do is encourage landlords and tenants to try to work together where possible. And I know that sometimes the chemistry is just not there. The chemistry, it may not be the best. Sometimes landlord and tenant chemistry or that relationship is not conducive to success. I get that, right? But I believe in communicating. If there's any way to resolve matters in a civil way, whereas you don't have to go to court, that's always best because at the end of the day, as a tenant, you still have to live at that property. And I believe in treating situations in a soft way. And I always used to hear my father, bless his heart, he's deceased now, but my father used to always talk about catching bees with honey versus vinegar. You don't have to be mean and nasty. And so this is why I try to encourage landlords and tenants to try to resolve matters in a civil way. And if all else fails, and unfortunately, if it has to go to court, then, do your part, but don't feel like that if there's a breach of contract that you have to accept it because you don't. So I look forward to hearing from you, Queen Lisa. As a matter of fact, let me bring up my email address. Let me put it up on the screen so that you will have it in the event that you do need to reach out to me once I am offline. So here's my email address, karissaspann@gmail.com. Please email me and I will follow up. When you email me, please state your name, your concern, and the best contact number that I can reach you on, and I will follow up. And I do welcome all of your comments and your questions. And so today, that's what this session is about, me answering as many questions as possible if you have any. So the second young lady who contacted me today, she's in a rental property and the owner, for whatever reason, refuses to go to the property. And so in that situation, the owner was harassing the tenant, asking the tenant to do things that pretty much was the owner's job. And so when the tenant refused, then the owner turned around and threatened to terminate the lease. And so I told her that, that was a violation. Landlords are not permitted to harass tenants. And when tenants are not acting in the capacity of the owner, for that owner to turn around and threaten to sue, I just thought that was really a horrible, an incredibly horrible thing to do. But I'm interested to see how that situation turns out. So today, Q&A, and then also a recap from last week. I shared information last week to help owners as well as tenants understand that there is a better way to navigate a landlord and tenant relationship. And what does that mean? Meaning that sometimes you have to ask the right questions to get the results that you're looking for. And when you are asking questions and you're not getting answers, don't ignore the fact that your answers, or that the questions rather, remain unanswered. Reach out to government agencies. If you have, as a tenant, if you have a situation where your landlord is not making repairs, there is usually, and in many cities, there is usually an inspector's office who will come out to inspect the property If there are any housing code violations, they will assess that. Now, I know that in a lot of people complaints that I've heard, uh, the inspectors have not necessarily come out. Maybe they conducted a virtual inspection because of the pandemic and COVID. I get it. I understand that sometimes as a tenant, you want the inspector to come out to physically see what's happening or what's going on. But here's the thing with that. When there are any housing code violations and there is an inspection, whether it's in person or a virtual inspection, it's still documented. So it's documented to the point where that inspector's office has your complaint that you requested an inspection to be done. Now, I would also suggest that as a tenant, if you have a concern, after that point, follow up with the inspector's office, making sure that the housing provider or the landlord is held accountable for making the necessary repairs. Okay, first and foremost. But here's the thing, before you contact your housing inspector's office, notify your landlord of whatever your complaints are. Give your landlord time to make the repairs. Okay. And unless you go to court and the judge tell you to not pay your rent or that you can put your money in escrow or rent registry, you are still responsible as a tenant to pay your rent. I had a young lady, she said, Karissa, my landlord has not made repairs, and so I'm not paying her rent. Okay. And when that landlord turned around and sued the tenant for non-payment of rent, she was in her feelings. And so there's a more effective way to do things to get the results that you need. Now, do I believe the tenant was right to not pay her rent? I believe, here's what I do believe. I believe that if she would have taken some extra steps to put it in the court registry or to file a complaint against the landlord, versus the landlord suing her for non-payment of rent, things might have gone in her favor. And so as a tenant, you don't want that on your record. You don't want a landlord to sue you for non-payment of rent, even if you feel like you have a case. I have seen so many cases that the judge ruled in favor for the tenant, for the renter, because they took the necessary steps. They had all their documentation. They had pictures. They had emails. They had text messages that they communicated with their landlord, and the landlord, for whatever reason, just flat out either refused or just did not make repairs. And it happens all the time. But this is, again, this is why I share information, because some people don't know as a tenant that they have a right to do that. I've seen a situation where the tenant found out that the landlord was overcharging them and had been overcharging them for a period of years. And so they were able in that situation to take their landlord to court, and the landlord ended up owing them money because they were overcharged. And so there is really a lot that goes on in the rental community, and a lot of people are not aware. Sometimes landlords, let me just speak to this. Sometimes landlords are not always knowledgeable about landlord and tenant laws, although they may own rental property, although they may own multiple rental properties. Landlords, if they are self-managing and depending on where the property is, they are not required to have a property manager's license or a real estate or a broker license. It's not a requirement. And so some of these landlords and owners are not aware of laws, right? And so they make mistakes. And it happens. But here's what I do know. What people don't know can and will hurt them. It could destroy their business. And so this is why I encourage landlords to get educated. And if they choose not to take a course, at least every Monday to show up right here on this platform, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, where I am sharing information every Monday at 7:30 p.m. It costs absolutely nothing to show up to get this information. Absolutely nothing. But it can cost thousands of dollars if a landlord make a mistake. All right. So that's my rant. I wanted to share about tenant rights and responsibilities. So let me go to an email that just came in. and this person is a landlord. They are asking about the the tenant move-in process, and whether or not they should allow a tenant to move in without paying a security deposit. Great question. Thank you so much for that. So if you are a landlord and you have a prospect, an applicant, potential tenant that want to rent your property, and this person is asking to not pay the security deposit, here's what I say to that. Judge the vibe that you have with that person. Judge your process, whether you treat your business like a business, right? So usually, let me just tell you how I handle my tenants. Okay, for any property that I currently manage and have managed over the years, one of the things that I do at the point of a tenant being approved to rent any of my rental properties, I will give them resources to get assistance with the security deposit. I also make it clear that if the contract rent is, let's say, I'm sorry, if the security deposit, let's say, is $3,000, right? I make it clear that the tenant is aware that the security deposit of $3,000 or whatever amount it is must be paid upfront before they move in. They acknowledge that they are aware. Now, I understand that sometimes people just don't have it. Stuff happens, things come up, and people can't afford to pay the security deposit in the first month's rent. Or sometimes the security deposit could be equivalent to 2 months' rent, right? So sometimes people don't have all that money just sitting around in a bank account. And so this is why I provide resources. So to answer your question, whether or not you should allow the tenant to move in without paying the security deposit, here is what I question. How would you handle the situation if you allow the tenant to move in, to not pay the security deposit, and they never pay you? So think about the long-term impact if a tenant doesn't pay the security deposit. But then there are situations where people will do the right thing and they are allowed to make the monthly payments and it's actually paid. But once a tenant moves in and the security deposit is not paid, or let's just say you allow them to start paying on the security deposit in maybe intervals of like 4 to 6 months, right? So the first month they pay, the second month they pay, the third month they partially pay. Uh, Month 4, 5, and 6, nothing else comes in. And so, as a landlord, and if you're new with managing property, sometimes it can be complicated. But if you have a tenant that's not paying the security deposit, you allow them to enter into a repayment agreement, and then for whatever reason they suddenly stop. Or let's just say their income has been impacted, right? And they can no longer pay the rent plus the security deposit. What are you going to do? Because in many cases, you can't take the tenant to court, right? Just depending on the jurisdiction. And so just really think about it. Look at whether or not the tenant has the ability to make the monthly payment, the rent plus whatever they're going to pay for the security deposit each month. Is it financially feasible for that particular family to make payments each month? Here is the worst mistake a landlord can make. Okay. Not understanding or not knowing how to calculate the family's budget. So here's what I mean by that. When I have a person that is applying for one of my rental property, I see your comment and I'm going to come to you. Thank you for your question. When a person, an applicant comes to me to rent the property, one of the things that I do is I look at the income. So if they work, if they receive Social Security, TANF, child support, alimony, whatever, I calculate the income for the year. All right. And usually the rule of thumb is that whatever the rent is, let's say the rent is $1,000. Someone is renting a property, the rent is $1,000. The rule of thumb is their income should be not less than 3 times that rent amount, right? So if the rent is $1,000, they should make not less than 3,000, sometimes up to 4 times the rent amount. Okay, so if you have a person that comes to you and they say, well, I'm looking to rent a property, one of the questions a landlord should always ask is, what is your budget? Okay, so if I have a person that comes to me, they're trying to rent this apartment, I said the contract rent is $1,000, right? That's just the rent. That doesn't include utilities. Utilities could be 100, 200, 300 on up per month on top of the rent. So let's just say the average utility usage is $250 a month. So that means the tenant is expected to pay $1,250 each month, $1,250 each month. So when I ask them their budget, if they say, well, my budget is $1,000, I don't want to pay $1,000 for rent and utilities, I already know that maybe it's a stretch with them going in if they have to pay utilities. And so going back to the statement that I made, that the biggest mistake an owner, a property manager, or a landlord can make is allowing a person to enter, not understanding what the budget is, not understanding that maybe this person cannot afford to pay the rent, plus the utilities, plus a monthly security deposit payment. So don't set yourself up and don't set the tenant up for failure by allowing them to come in knowing that they cannot afford it. All right, so let me go to the comment section. Ronnie G, here's your question. Can a tenant use a portable washing machine in an apartment without permission? The kind that hooks up to the kitchen sink. What happens if the hose breaks and floods the apartment? Great question. Tenants are not permitted to install portable washing machines unless it has been approved. Okay, it should be in writing. It should always be in writing. And if a tenant is asking to install a washing machine, please make sure that you tell the tenant to put it in writing, and make sure that as a landlord, you are responding in writing, giving the tenant permission or not giving them permission, by saying something like, Mr. Mrs. Tenant, thank you for your request to install a portable washing machine. At this time, the property is not set up for such appliances or devices. And then, for instance, if there's a laundromat nearby, maybe communicate if there's a laundromat nearby, or if there is some sort of wash and dryer on the premises, let them know that, but definitely respond in writing. Because here's why. If the tenant go ahead and install it, right, and they don't have permission, at that point, the landlord can definitely take the tenant to court, because that's a breach of the lease. That's a violation of the lease. So if the tenant installs it, the hose break, it floods the apartment, it is the tenant's responsibility to cover the cost. All right. And if that happens, unfortunately, as a housing provider, as a landlord, it may be your job to take care or to make arrangements to cover the damage, but you can always charge the tenant whatever the cost is for the repair. Great question. We've been finding a lot of millipedes in our basement apartment. We keep it very clean, so it must be the unit. Is the landlord responsible for pest control in this instance? Great question, Sheila. Thank you so much for that. Look at what is in your lease. Hopefully, it's clear in your lease in writing that the landlord will provide pest control services. Sometimes, and unfortunately, when it's not in writing, it's really hard to say who's responsible. It's hard to enforce something that does not exist. And so if it's not in a lease, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So if your lease doesn't say that your landlord is responsible for any type of pest control issues, then I mean, you can ask the landlord and hopefully they'll do the right thing. But ultimately, it should be in writing. Now, if the situation is so bad and the landlord is not willing to intervene and pay for pest control services, and if it's that bad, if it's infestation, you feel like the place is uninhabitable or it's not sanitary, contact the inspector's office. And you can always maybe look at a remedy to get rid of the issue. I don't know about like raid or anything like that for this type of bug, but sometimes um, uh, buying or making your own solution to help rid critters and stuff from thinking that they can, habitate with you or cohabitate rather. I always suggest that. So talk to the landlord. Look at your lease first. Talk to the landlord. See what the landlord is willing to do. If it's not habitable, if it's not sanitary, contact the inspector's office, and then also maybe consider buying some pest control chemicals and treatment and stuff like that, if you will. All right. So Sheila, you said waking up in the middle of the night and squishing one with my bare foot is where I drew the line. I just cringed reading that. I hate bugs. I hate spiders. I probably would feel uncomfortable as well. And sometimes it happens, especially in the basement apartment. So think about the basement. It's sometimes it's the ground level or it's beneath ground level, and bugs will crawl, especially when the weather starts to get nice. You find that there are bugs and ants and spiders and cockroaches and all the things that we don't like. I know that it has to be uncomfortable. So look at what's in writing, see if your landlord would take care of that. And especially if your landlord values you and appreciate you being there and being a tenant. If it were me, I would just go ahead and just pay for pest control to try to get rid of the problem. But thank you for that question. All right, Ronnie G, follow-up question. If permission is given for the wash machine, can the landlord increase the rent because the water bill will go up? Now, that's a great question. So hopefully that happens in advance before the lease is signed. So here is where you can run the risk as a landlord, allowing the tenant, once the lease is in play, allowing the tenant to put the wash machine in, right, to install the wash machine. Let me just put a quarter in the meter. Let me just park here. If you are allowing your tenant to get a portable washing machine, please make sure that you express in writing that it should be, where possible, professionally installed. Okay, so they can't just hook it up and water just leak out, holes break because it's improperly installed. So it's going to be so important to put that language very clearly in writing. So let's just say you want to increase the rent, Ronnie G, right? But the 1 year it hasn't been a year since they've been living on the property. I'm just hypothetically saying, I don't know the situation. And let's just say that it's in a jurisdiction where the tenant must live there for 1 year before you can increase the rent. That will put you in a tight spot because you won't be able to increase the rent. But you could, however, have that conversation with the tenant, encourage them to pay more because you want them to have the convenience of having that washing machine. You want to accommodate them, but also help them to understand that it is at a cost. And so obviously having an increase in that water bill is not part of your plan to run your business. And so obviously they need to understand and be aware that washing machine, it is going to cost, and see if they are willing to pay something extra on that water bill. So if you can't create a new lease, put it in writing, have the tenant to sign it saying that they acknowledge and agree that they're responsible for an increase. So let's just say you charge them an extra $25, $50, $75 a month because of the washing machine. Just make sure that the tenant understand the cost, because if you don't have it in writing, it's going to be a challenge to enforce it, because if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. And you can't always put a verbal conversation in the file, especially if it has to go to the court. All right. Great questions. And I hope that I answered the questions and made it clear and understandable. So today is all about Q&A. Are there any other questions I'm able to answer for any of you? If so, please put it in the comment box. And so this is what I do. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is what I do each and every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I share information that is applicable for landlords as well as tenants. I am not always for the landlords, and I'm not always for the tenants. Okay. I like to just walk right down the middle aisle and give information for both parties, landlords as well as tenants. I believe that an educated rental property is a better community. All right, so I'll wait a few seconds to see if any more questions are going to come in. I did put my email address up because I want you to reach me in the event that you have a question. And again, if you have a topic that you would like for me to cover in the upcoming weeks, please let me know. I would love to talk about whatever you feel is necessary for you to have more information about, whether you are a landlord or a tenant. It doesn't matter the jurisdiction. The laws, I will say that the laws may be a little differently just depending on where the rental property is. But as long as I have that information, I can get that information for you. So that looks like all of the questions for today. All right. So with that being said, no more questions, no more comments, remarks, or observations. All right. I'm going to say thank you again for tuning in. My time is up. I thank you for yours. Please make sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please go to YouTube. For those of you who are watching on Facebook and LinkedIn, please subscribe. Smash that subscribe button so that you'll be the first to know when I am live and online. Hello, Dr. Baker. Thank you so much for tuning in, beautiful. So the topic today was all about Q&A, Ask Karissa, questions that landlords and tenants have. And so we covered quite a few today. I do appreciate you all tuning in. Please share this information, share it with other landlords. Please share it with tenants as well. I enjoy coming on and sharing with you all. I enjoy answering your questions. I'll be sharing more information for landlords next week. I previously shared how I created a landlord master strategy course, and people have been signing up. I am now signing up for my next session. It is a 6-week online course where you work with me one-on-one, where I look at landlord systems. I help them implement systems to attract quality tenants, to quickly fill vacant units, and to get paid monthly like an ATM. It's not a walk in the park. It's not easy, but it's definitely doable. And so I help owners look at systems that they have, or maybe systems that they need to put in place. And so I'll share more information with you next week. So please make sure that you are tuning in. And if you feel like you would like to work with me, please email me. All right. Because I want to make sure that it's a good fit for me, and I want to make sure that it's a good fit for you. So landlords, this is for landlords. LandlordLyfe master strategy. I'm excited to share that with you all. A lot of you know that I teach property management. I have been a property management educator, and I enjoy sharing. Sharing is caring. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. My time is up. I thank you for yours. 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll see you all next week. Bye for now.